start, you know.
Hey, Roberta, we're recording you now. Sorry to interrupt. We're gonna get, sorry for being a little late. Can you guys hear me in the room?
Yep.
All right. Well, good to see everyone. Looks like we have like 27 people online and another like 15, 20 in the room, plus the judges next door. So we have a quorum. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing well with the heat. It's actually not too bad here. We have the doors open and it's breezy. And we have the speaker, Gary Yong Gee. Is it G or Gee? Sorry.
Gee, it's pronounced.
Gee. So he's joining us all the way from Brisbane in Australia. And thank you for coming and speaking to us tonight. Before the speaker, we have some announcements. And let's tee up the slides. All right. I already did. All right. Well, I'm doing the announcements. Then tonight's speaker is Gary, followed by Lynne's wonderful show and tell online for those that sent those in. We actually have a nice little table of some, I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 10. Anyway, an assortment of plants in person as well. Maybe more will show, and then we'll have for folks online as well as in the room. We have some $20 gift certificates for Sunset Valley Orchid as part of the raffle, as well as we have plants on the plant table that were also from Sunset Valley, as well as someone brought in some Tillandsia that people wanted. I think it might be Faye brought that. There's also drinks and things in here for folks that want that. In terms of other announcements, let's move to the next slide. We want to welcome, we have technically 5 new members. So some are household members. So Vicky joined actually as a supporting level member. Thank you, Vicky. And then Dave Larkin and Haley Young joined as a household, as well as, I'm going to do really, let me try my speaking skills here. Kaja Farabaksh and all Walidi Farabaksh. All joined in the last month as new members. So welcome if you're online, and speak up and introduce yourself if you're here or online. For AOS judging, it's just a reminder. So there's judging going on next door here tonight, and there's also mid-month at Fololi down in Woodside.
Yeah. You know, the slides, I think you may be advancing the slides, but the one that shows on the screen is not. We only have the agenda, and it's not.
Right.
It's in the speaker view.
One thing.
No better.
Is that better?
Better.
Okay.
All right. People are texting me to get logged in. All right. So, and then for the Sacramento Judging Center, California, Sierra Nevada, they meet the day after us. So their judging is at their meeting on Wednesday night, first Wednesday. They also typically have been having mid-month judgings, but those are suspended until the beginning of next year. So, oh, and then I guess in the announcements, so the Sacramento Orchid Society is having their show coming up in October, and I put some postcards out.
Yeah, it's in the
Oh, sorry.
first up. All right.
Oh, our stuff. I should let you.
I'll go.
You do.
So we have a date now for the next POE. It'll be February 23rd to 26th, obviously next year. And we need a theme. So we've got a form where you can enter a contest and suggest the theme. You've got until at some point on Sunday, probably at the end of the day. Whichever is the winning theme will win 2 free passes to the whole show, including the opening night gala, which is always fun. The winning theme will be decided at our next combo board meeting and show committee meeting, which is next Monday. It's the same Zoom link as this, so you know how to get to it. So if you've got an entry, you've got a reason to attend. Then we'll all be back here in a month. Jim Hylick is going to be speaking on genetic and breeding concepts in orchids. He'll be live and in person here in the Fair Building. And we're going to do a survey also to see what people would like for next year's programming. So that'll go out as well. You don't need to try and memorize these links. So yeah, those are our events. There's a lot more going on. The Santa Clara Valley Orchid Society has an auction tomorrow night. That's down here in San Jose. So check that out.
Gonna be awesome. I'm the auctioneer.
Oh, Bill's gonna be the auctioneer.
Gonna be awesome.
I saw the
I'm
list.
Going twice.
It's a very extensive list of some great stuff.
It's a big list. We have to go to 130 plants in 2 hours flat. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting.
So head on down and get some of those.
Got it.
The Bay Area Pro-Thal Alliance has a meeting next Saturday, or this Saturday, excuse me. It's going to be in Dexter Hode's house in Berkeley.
I have his address. So if you want his address, just contact, I can give it to you. We just didn't want to publish it. So if interested, let me know. Let you know. I'll send it to you. Give it to you.
The University of California Botanical Garden at Berkeley let us know they're having a succulent plant sale. It starts today through Sunday. More information at their website. California Orchids is having their final sale. Mary Nesbitt is retiring. They're going to have a big sale in 2 weeks. It's in Bolinas, so head up there, over there, whichever direction you need to go. Carpool. It should be really good. And what's happening to our business? This is what I know.
Lynn, do you know? Anyone know online?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What's happening to Mary Nesbitt's business?
She's just ready to retire. She wants to be a hobbyist like Tom and Susan and I. And she's selling off most of her collection. She's still going to do boarding for just the Bolinas clients like Michael Tilson Thomas, who lives out there. But she wants to have fun with orchids instead of having it as a business. She's not selling the property. I'm taking over her large warm greenhouse. Tom has her large cool greenhouse, and Susan has the greenhouse that she and I have been in. But lots and lots of great plants for sale at really good prices that Mary's been growing for years. This is it. You need to be there.
Yeah.
Week from this Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think here's the flyer for it. So look that up. Continuing on, Orchids Digest announced that their big year-end issue is the Volagine checklist. Sologeny, thank you. Deadline to join and receive that issue is next Thursday, 15th. More information at their website. The Native Orchid Conference's virtual lecture series is resuming. The first one is later this month. I'm not even going to investigating, that fungi as drivers of host tree specificity in Dendrophylax and Dendes. More information at their website. Then yes, the California Sierra Nevada Judgment Center is going to host the AOS Panning for Orchids show and sale in late October. It's going to be at the Embassy Suites Sacramento Riverfront, obviously in Sacramento. They've got their information. We've got flyers, and I'll show you a flyer in just a second. And then Orchid Digest also has another thing. They've got a fall speaker day. It's going to be a virtual event in the middle of November. So that's on their website. And so here's Well, there was a flyer there for a second. There it is. Yeah, panning for orchids. Looks fun. So save the date. Start checking it out. And then we can move on to Gary, the main event here. We're very excited. He's coming all the way from Brisbane. I'll just go into this quick bio from him. Thank you. So he's been growing orchids for the last 40 years. His dates, well, you can read it. He maintains a large hobby greenhouse, cultivating Australian native and exotic species. He's over 100,000 orchid photographs taken on travels to parts of Australia, New Guinea, Asia, Europe, and Central and South America, South Africa, and Madagascar, both at shows and institutes. Gary is an orchid judge with the Australian Orchid Council. He's also a member of several Australian orchid societies, the AOS and OCA. His main interest in species orchids, he's contributed an extensive monthly article to the Orchid Species Bulletin, published by the Orchid Species Society for over 30 years. Gary has also written occasional articles for Orchids Australia and Australian Orchid Review, and given numerous talks to various orchid societies in Australia and overseas via Zoom. Like us, we're very grateful. The Vandaceous Orchid Supplement for Orchids Bulletin at the AOS in November 2021 has an article about the reeds. He has a website which is currently being upgraded and shows some of his photographs at younggee.me. Gets a little cut off here, but his presentation tonight is the Epiphytic and Lithophytic orchids of Southeast Queensland, and will feature a range of various species that are native to the subtropical region of Australia. And this area is home to something there. Sorry, it gets cut off. Dendrobiums of some kind. Thank you. With that, I will stop rambling and I will turn it over to Gary.
All right, thank you very much.
Stop my share.
Okay, so
Lord
share
willing.
screen. All right, so the screen is there on up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, so the topic's fairly self-explanatory. So epiphytic, so the ones that grow on trees, the lithophytic, the ones that grow on rocks in the Southeast Queensland region. If you have any questions as we're going through, I'm quite happy if you want to butt in and ask a question. So there's no problems with that. Now, 180 million years ago, Australia separated from Madagascar in India, and so it's eventually formed the country that we have today. The map that you see on the screen shows you an overlay of Australia with the United States, giving you an indication of how large our country is. And so Brisbane's located on the east coast at the most easterly point, and the country has quite a large dry area in the centre. So all of the forests are on the east coast or around the coastal regions, and that's where most of the rainfall occurs. And so it's not surprising that most of the cities are in these particular regions. So some statistics on the right-hand side, you can see that Australia has over 100 different orchid genera and more than 1,700 different species. And there are still species being described at the moment. Only a quarter of them are the epiphytes and lithophytes, so the majority of them are terrestrial orchids. So a couple of biodiversity hotspots. So in the southwest of Australia, we have a lot of the terrestrial orchids, and the epiphytic and lithophytic orchids are only found in the northern part of the country and along the east coast, going down into, oh, actually not in Tasmania, just down to Victoria. So along the east coast. So in Tasmania, it's only terrestrial orchids. Just a close-up of this area here, the Brisbane area where I live. So I live in suburban Brisbane. It's right on the at sea level, so it's very warm. And there is a large area surrounding Brisbane where you can find quite a lot of orchids. And so the orchids are generally found in the higher areas, so into the mountains. But there are some that will also occur closer to sea level. I'll put on here a little map indicating the rainfall that we get in this area and also the temperature range of that Brisbane experiences. So Brisbane is in a subtropical climate, so we get fairly warm summers and generally quite dry winters where we don't get a lot of rainfall during most years, although this particular year we've had a lot of rain during our winter. So you can see here that Brisbane itself doesn't suffer very cold temperatures. We have a minimum of about, or an average minimum of around 50 Fahrenheit in winter. And in the summertime, we get temperatures up to around 85 Fahrenheit. And the rainfall is higher during the warmer periods, the summertime, and lower in the winter. A lot of the nomenclature that I'm going to be using comes from this recent publication put out by David Jones, and it's so you'll come. So I'll present you a number of names that you may not have come across. This particular publication is very extensive and certainly a worthwhile publication. I'm going to start off with some of the forests. So a lot of the rainforests around locally have very high trees, and a lot of the epiphytes can be found not only low down where the plants don't get so much light, but also most of them are sort of fairly high up in the trees, generally out of reach of the camera. Sarcochilus falcatus, one of the species that generally grows on mossy trees, and it is exposed often to fairly bright light because it grows up high, and also sometimes a little bit further down as well. So sometimes the plants that are low down don't often bloom as regularly as the ones that receive brighter light. So just got here a couple of examples where the plants are growing fairly low down, where they don't sort of flower as often as the ones that receive brighter light. And you can see in this particular area that the plants receive various amounts of sunlight throughout the day as the sun shifts around. The species itself carries flowers that are about maybe a ½ an inch. I've got to sort of convert from metric to imperial view, and so these are quite sweetly scented flowers. They produce about a dozen flowers on the stem, and they're quite variable in color, but the lip has quite a distinct fleshy midlobe, and the generic name sarco comes from the Greek fleshy, chylus meaning lip, and the lip has side lobes which sort of wrap around the side of the column. It does have a lovely crystalline texture as well. So you can see some variations here, so it is quite variable. And I don't find this a particularly easy species for my conditions because I'm lowland area. It does like a little bit of a cool temperature. In 2019, Sarcochilus niveus was described because it's basically a white flowered species, and previous to this, it was included in a broad Sarcochilus falcatus. It's a species that flowers about 6 to 8 weeks later than Sarcochilus falcatus, and it's also reasonably widespread along the east coast of New South Wales. Delichiton is a resurrected name. It's an old name that was re-established by a couple of Australian taxonomists, Mark Clements and David Jones. And so It refers to a group of orchids that are found predominantly in Australia. So a lot of the Australian native dendrobiums are included in this particular genus. So the plants are characterized by having generally cylindrical pseudobulbs, several leaves at the top of the stem, which are permanent leaves, and they produce a long inflorescence with a lot of flowers in this particular species. So this is also known as Dendrobium speciosum. So that's a fairly widespread species complex on the east coast of Australia. And the variety Hillii is the one that occurs in this particular region. So you can see here that it's growing, in this case, in conjunction with an epiphytic fern, which is an elkhorn fern. And here it's just on the side of a tree where it gets a lot of light as well as a lot of air movement. It also occurs as a lithophyte, so it grows on rocks, and there are various plants here in bloom on the side of this particular cliff. So in this situation, the plants get very bright light, but they also get the cool breezes that rise up the side of the cliff here. The roots are amongst the rocks, so the roots stay reasonably cool, and you can see that it's growing in very harsh conditions. So it's fairly important with these that they be given a good amount of light, otherwise they're not going to flower. Other areas, sometimes you've just got to be lucky to see these out in bloom. And so these are two photographs that I've taken of the same plant at different times when I've visited. So I just happen to be lucky on the right-hand side to see this in flower. The species has the smallest flowers of the varieties of Dendrobium speciosum, and so it's not as desirable compared with some of the other variants. The segments tend to be on the narrow side, predominantly white flowers. Occasionally you'll get a yellow example in this particular species or variety of Dendrobium speciosum. Flowers have a strong perfume. They don't last all that long, usually about a week, 10 days. Also growing lithophytically in the same sort of area as Sarcochilus hartmannii. Again, the flower stems are always moving because of the air movement. Plants get very bright light, but the roots are sort of amongst the crevices in the rock, so they can stay reasonably moist if there's moisture around. The species itself is widely used in hybridizing. It's perhaps got the largest and fullest shaped flowers of the genus, and it varies quite a lot in color. You can maybe make out that the crystalline texture of the flowers here, and the center of the flower has variable amounts of red, and the lip also has variable amounts of orange yellow. When well grown, this species can be very spectacular. And the important thing with cultivation of all orchids really is the roots. They need a good root system to support the leaves and also the flowers. In many cases, the inflorescences are slightly pendulous. Occasionally you'll find clones that have more upright racemes. Delichiton kingianus or Dendrobium kingianum, it's a lithophytic plant. It's quite variable in growth habits, often found on rock crevices in a little bit more shady areas, but they can also be exposed to fairly bright light. The plants themselves can sometimes be found with a little bit of moss around them, particularly where there's a lot of seepage coming from uphill. The species itself is centered during the daytime. Flower stems carry, again, flowers that are about maybe ½ an inch across, and typically sort of pinkish sort of flowers with a darker colored lip. There's been a lot of line breeding done to improve the shape of this particular species. There's a lot of other color variants like white forms and speckled forms as well. Here we have the speckled forms and the red colored forms as well. Genus Cesticus, or what used to be called Leparis, are fairly widespread throughout the Southeast Asian region, with a few species extending into Australia, including this particular one. Svensonii is a lithophyte growing on rocks, sometimes forming large masses. And they produce these flowers which have got a large lip. Sepals and petals are quite narrow, and the flowers are pollinated, I think, by fungus gnats or flies, because they don't produce a very pleasant scent, quite an awful sort of a smell during the daytime. Close-up of another species, Cysticus coelogenoides. Apparently the flowers reminded the botanists of the genus Coelogene. So they've got quite a broad lip. Their lip mid or apex is serrated at the end. These often have a little bit of a nectar, a bit of, I suppose, like nectar, a droplet of liquid in the center of the lip, which is probably an attractant for the pollinator. I've never managed to see this particular species in bloom in its natural habitat, but this is Sarcocalis fitzgeraldii. It's again a showy species widely used in hybridizing, and has flowers that are again about ½ an inch across. Usually the lip is distinctly yellow. So I've borrowed a couple of photos from my friend Philip Arrowsmith, who's seen this growing in the wild. It's growing lithophytically and also has the common name of ravine orchid because it's generally found in fairly dark areas which are very moist and quite humid. So it's a species that doesn't need to be grown with very bright light like its other species, Sarcocalis hartmannii. It's quite variable in color, so generally has a lot of reddish markings in the center of the flower. And with line breeding, the color has sort of been expanded out in the flower. And one interesting thing with this one is that sometimes the coloration can be variable depending on when the flowers open or when the buds develop. So often in very cold conditions, you'll get a lot more intense red coloration throughout the flower. And some people have found that when the inflorescences elongate, if there are temperature changes, the color of the flowers might vary on the flower stem. Because Australia is such an old country, we have a number of extinct volcanoes, and this is the best of all Lookout, which is at the back of Brisbane. It provides an amazing view to the ocean in the distance. And we are, well, I'm standing at about 1,000 meters above sea level. So that's 300 feet, I think, in your terms. So it's not particularly high. And so it's in this particular area that we can find quite a lot of orchids. Got a little video coming up. And it sort of gives you an indication of the sort of habitat where these orchids up at this area experience. So oftentimes a lot of cloud rolls through, it's quite breezy. So these are the orchids that like those cooler conditions, and hence it doesn't surprise me that you can grow these very well in your area. So the next genus is Docrylia. This is a genus that has been widely recognized in Australia for quite a number of years, but more recently taxonomists have decided to put it back into the genus Dendrobium. So this is Docrylia pugioniformis. It's a species that has dagger-shaped leaves, and in this species it produces a single flower from the end of the stem. So the Docrylias don't produce pseudobulbs. They have these wiry stems, single leaves, and non-resupinate flowers. So the flower is upside down. It has the lip sitting above the column. And you can see it's quite variable. So has usually quite a lot of markings at the base of the sepals and petals, beautiful colored markings on the lip, and a sweet perfume. Docrylias generally don't last all that long, mostly a week, 10 days when they have their shell flowers. And the next one is Docrylia schunina, has these, again, terete leaves in this particular case, which are often grooved or ridged. and very sweetly scented flowers during the daytime. Dockylia burmannii, and a number of them are quite messy looking plants. They don't sort of necessarily grow compactly. Dockylia mortii, little short leaves, and again the leaves are have got grooves in the leaves. Thelychiton velocirostris also occurs in this area, and it's one of those unique Australian native species that grows on a specific host. And in this case, it's the Antarctic beech trees that are found on only some areas on the east coast, including around the Brisbane area and New South Wales. So it's not a very common species. It's called velocirostris because the apex of the lip has a little beak, which I can't really see, but it must have reminded someone of a falcon's beak. Very sweetly scented, and it's a species that doesn't really bloom very well in the Brisbane area because it just doesn't get cold enough. In some areas where this grows, the plants receive snow, which doesn't occur very often these days, but that gives you an indication of how cold the area can get. Another genus now, this is the genus Adelapetalum. Again, not a new genus, it's an old genus that's been resurrected. And it's, in this case, it's a lithophytic species growing on rocks. A common name is the pineapple orchid because the pseudobulbs have these ribs or ridges, grooves, bumps on them, which look a little bit like a pineapple. Single leaf, spreading species, and the species produces inflorescences from the base of the pseudobulb, which carry about half a dozen flowers that are again maybe about half an inch across. Sometimes the lateral sepals can be a bit more spreading. The petals are small and sitting above the column and the lip, and that beautiful sort of green color with the contrasting darker colored lip. Adelapetalum bracteatum, it has usually this sort of a glaucous or glaucous chalky coloring or texture to the outside of the flowers, and also the rachis and the ovary of the flower. Quite variable in color, so you can see a couple of color forms there. Adelapetalum exiguum grows generally lower down on the trees, often on the mossy trunks, where it can form large mats over a lot of the trunk of the trees. In this case, it's a rambling mat-forming plant, so it has a long distance between the pseudobulbs. The rhizome is maybe an inch or an inch and a half, 2 inches long. Inflorescences carry 2 or 3 of these flowers, which have got a hinged lip. And again, with many of the bulbophyllum alliance, the flowers are relatively short-lived. Adelapetalum weinthorlii, species with quite chunky, large flowers for the size of the plant. And this is a species that's rarely seen in cultivation and has a very large lip sitting beneath the column there. Genus Oxysepala is also a resurrected generic name for a section of bulbophyllum which is often referred to as the section Oxysepalum. The genus is widespread, occurring also into Southeast Asia, and the plants don't have any, well, they have very insignificant pseudobulbs, which are not very obvious. So the pseudobulbs are quite tiny, they have a large fleshy leaf, and the flowers are produced from nodes along the rhizome. Often you get a lot of them being produced at the one time. So they're single flowers with quite fleshy segments, and the segments are quite glossy. So you've got the sepals here, the lip, and very tiny petals on each side of the column. Another Oxysepala here growing on the side of a tree with tiny flowers. Again, these are probably less than 1/8 of an inch tall. tucked away in the foliage. You can see how the leaves are quite fleshy. And Lamingtonensis was named for the Lamington Plateau, where this one occurs on the outskirts of the Brisbane area. In this case, this species has quite sharp sepals, and a lot of them do have quite pointed segments. Next genus is the genus Onchophyllum. There's only 2 species in the genus, or you might want to call it Bulbophyllum, but they're very distinctive plants. They have tiny little pseudobulb, quite a woody sort of rhizome, and you can see some roots here, very large flower for the size of the plant. And where are the leaves? The leaves are actually ephemeral. They're just these tiny little dried up things at the top of the pseudobulb. So they have a small leaf which doesn't last for very long. You might note there that the back of the flowers have got sort of bristles on the back. And again, with the Bulbophyllum's allies, not very long-lived flowers. So this species generally grows fairly high up in the trees, and you generally won't find it until after a storm when these plants are blown down. Likewise, Onchophyllum globuliforme, it's also high up in the trees, bright light, and has very tall flower stems compared with the previous species. Now, going back to genus Docrylia, Docrylia teretifolia, named because of the terete or pencil-like leaves, generally grows fairly high up, and occasionally you might see them a bit more obviously when the trees are dying. We don't often get some of these large trees dying, but occasionally you might come across these. So in this situation, the species gets a lot of bright light, good breezes, and they seem to grow and flower very well. Occasionally you will find them a bit lower down, and this is a species that has maybe up to about a dozen flowers on the flower stem. Flowers are quite large, about 2 inches across, maybe 2.5 inches. And again, they are non-resupinate flowers, as in common with other Docrylias. Flowers are variable in color, usually white, and sometimes more into cream color or yellow. The lip is quite long and wraps around itself, so it forms a circle by refurling or curving backwards. The other thing that's in common with most of the Docrylias is that they have this wavy margin. They also have a number of ridges or calli, longitudinal calli on the lip, and this must play a part in the pollination syndrome for this particular genus. So the bees must be guided down to the back of the flower to affect pollination. Some of the habitats are areas where there's a lot of moisture. So in nearby creeks and streams, you'll find quite a number of orchids that are not necessarily high up in the trees, but receiving that extra humidity. So there are a number of other Sarcocalis species that are perhaps not too well known for growers in the US. Things like Sarcocalis dilatatus has quite a good root system. And one of the things I always mention with my culture is that roots are, I think, the most important part of an orchid. So you need to look after your roots when you're growing them. The species was called dilatatus because of the way the sepals are dilated or elongated away from each other. So you've got these petals which are very upright, and you've got the lateral sepals here, the dorsal, and that very fleshy lip. Varies quite a lot in color. Most forms are this sort of reddy brown coloration, but there is a green form which is not very common. Sarcocalis parviflorus has typically green colored flowers. The flowers are growing on inflorescences that are pendulous, growing in fairly wet, moist areas. So in the rainforest areas, usually up a little bit higher. Sometimes it's known as Sarcocalis olivaceus, which is a later species. So the flowers face downwards, they face the ground, and they have sort of various amounts of brownish coloration on the sepals and petals. And the lip usually has a number of veins on the mid-lobe of the lip. Sarcocarpus spathulatus occurs in the area. I've never actually managed to see this in situ, but it's a species that has a very prominent chin or apex to the lip. So it varies from green through to brown. Plectoriza tridentata, sometimes known as the tangleroot orchid. It's a species that often grows as a twig epiphyte. And you can see that it's got this long, wavy, curly root system. It varies from brown to green and has quite a distinct three-pointed lip, so hence the name tridentata. Plectoriza beckleri, it's another orchid. Again, a twig epiphyte, small flowers that are maybe less than 1/8 of an inch across, and flowers that are fairly similar to the previous species. And in fact, this was at one stage put into a genus of its own. And it was named Papillilabium because the lip has quite a lot of papillae or little warts on the surface of the lip.
Which tribe is this this genus related to?
Okay,
Is
the tribe you're asking about, all of these belong to the Eridae tribe. So, or Vandiae. So,
so these are
yes.
related to Cercochilus then?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there has been a little bit of breeding done with Peristeranthus and also the so Plectoriza and Peristeranthus. So a number of these have been bred with Sarcochilus to produce hybrids. Quite a reasonably large growing plant. It's a monopodial Eridae tribe. Lots of very tiny flowers, which usually look downwards, and the flowers have a distinct lip. So typically, usually brownish sort of colored flowers. The viridis for yellow-green form is a hypochromic form. So this is a form that lacks the anthocyanin pigmentation, and so is just the green form of the species. One species that I've never managed to see in bloom in the wild is Taeniophyllum mulleri. So it's one of the leafless genera, which is a bit more widespread throughout Southeast Asia, but this species occurs locally. And so it's a genus that relies on the chlorophyll in the roots for photosynthesis. And in this case, this species has these fairly fine, slender flower stems with these very tiny flowers, probably a 1/16 of an inch across, which only lasts for one day. So you've got to be at the area on the right day to see this in bloom. So I've borrowed this photo from another friend of mine, Graham Corbin, who does a lot of exploring in the area. Another genus is the genus Rhinoriza, meaning the genus is named because of the raspy roots. So the common name raspy root orchid for this species. It's a plant that we don't see in cultivation very often. And it produces quite large flowers. These flowers can be maybe 3 to 4 inches long. Sometimes the flowers will open up well, other times they don't open up very much at all. And the flowers only last for one day. So you've got to be lucky again to see this in bloom in situ. Occasionally the inflorescence will elongate. So after these flowers are finished, it will elongate and produce another set of flowers. So just showing you some more open flowers. The lip is concave, and the pollinator has to be around to pollinate it when it's open for that particular day. So generally all the plants in the one area will open on the same day. Australorchis monophylla, or Dendrobium monophyllum, species that often grows high up in the trees, and also can be found growing on rocks as well in fairly bright areas. Produces fairly short pseudobulbs, single leaf at the top, and the inflorescence emerges from a small spathe or sheath at the top of the pseudobulb. It's one of my favorite species from the point of view of the beautiful perfume that it produces, a very strong, sweet smell during the daytime. And the flowers last very well. They last for about 6 to 8 weeks. Another Australorchis, Australorchis schneiderae, has pendulous inflorescences, similar sort of growth habit to the previous one, and flowers that don't open up very much. So you can see that the flowers are very long and with a very large callus on the base of the lip or on the disc of the lip. Delicatum gracilicolis or Dendrobium gracilicolis is extremely variable, very widespread along the east coast. And the plants vary from very short stems to quite long stems that might be about 15 inches long, maybe even up to 30 inches long. Permanent leaves at the top of the stem, and it's from this area where you'll get the flower stems. So the flowers are yellow, they vary in the intensity of the yellow, but usually the back of the flowers is marked with these red, purpley colored markings on the back. Tropilus, Tropilus, emula, species that grows on different types of hosts. So usually boxwood or ironbark trees. And so the plants have these long cylindrical stems, a couple of leaves at the top, and these very spidery looking flowers, which don't last, again, all that long in this particular genus. They last for about 5 days or so. And as they go over, the flowers usually go pink. Mostly white, occasionally sort of cream colored flowers. And the callus of this one has quite a wavy sort of movement to the callus. In some of the forested areas, the trees are a bit more open, and so the plants, not only growing in the tops of the trees, but also further down, receive more light. So these are some of the forested areas around Brisbane that are not really rainforests, so they get less rainfall and so are slightly drier. I think there is actually a cymbidium at the top here. Now another Docrelia species. This grows in this sort of drier country, and so it's a plant that will tolerate a bit more or less moisture or less water. Non-resupinate flowers, inflorescences are very short, and you can see here that it's being produced at the apex of the stem and the leaf is above it. It was called cucumerina or cucumerina because of the gherkin-shaped leaves. So the leaves have got bumps on them, very much like a small gherkin. Sarcochilus eriochyllus, species that grows on rocks, grows actually close to Brisbane, and you can actually just go to a lovely park in the Brisbane area and see this species growing. Flowers are produced on fairly slender stems, and because of the weight of the flowers, the stems usually become pendulous. Small flowers with a hairy lip midlobe.
Gary, quick question.
Sure.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just have a question about cucumeria. Can you a little bit elaborate the areas that it grows? I have one and I was not familiar with the area it grows. So does it need winter rest, or does it have a lot of water, or grows in trees, or on or with rocks? Can you please elaborate?
All right, I couldn't quite hear the question. Are you in the conference?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
the meeting room?
Could
Are you able to?
Could you talk some more about the cucumberia, its habitat and resting period?
All right, so which one is this you're asking about?
2 slides ago or 2 slides ago.
2 slides ago,
2 slides ago.
the cucumber, the gherkin one.
Oh, okay, all right. The Docrylia or Dendrobium cucumeronum. Okay,
Yes.
so this one is a species that often grows on the underside of branches of trees. So surprisingly, it's just a habitat it seems to have adapted to. So it doesn't necessarily need a lot of light, but I have to admit that it's a species that I've grown for a number of years myself, and I've never managed to bloom the one that I've got. So it's if you're not blooming it, it may mean that you could give it a bit more light.
Gary,
Yes.
I'm growing that outside in San Francisco and it bloomed this year for me.
Ah,
And it's
okay.
kind of shady.
All right.
What month was that? Okay.
When did it bloom?
Yes.
I don't know, a couple months ago, I think.
Give it to Kay.
Thank you.
So with cultivating this one, generally it's subject to this wet summer period. So that's the period when it's going to get most rainfall. And then it'll suffer, go through a drier period when there's much less rainfall. But at no stage is it going to be without rain for a long period. And in some of these areas during the nighttime, the plants will get a little bit of maybe condensation. So that will be enough to sustain the plants through the dry period. So while it's actively growing, you could water it fairly regularly. And then when it's not actively growing, just less water. I hope that sort of answers your sort of cultural question. Okay, Oberonia, a fairly widespread genus, a lot of areas of Southeast Asia. And these are plants that have these flattened fan-shaped growths. Sometimes the growths are elongated, but in this case, they're fairly compact. This one's growing on a rock, but it will also be found growing on trees. Very minute flowers. Flowers generally open up more or less simultaneously, and they form these walls around the rachis of the flower stem. They don't last all that long, and it's a species that some people do cultivate very well. So in these cases, the plants are reasonably old to get the large number of flower stems and the large number of growths. Australia has 3 Cymbidium species, which is a genus fairly widespread throughout most of mainland Southeast Asia and into the Indonesian region. And this is Cymbidium madidum or madidum, species that grows generally epiphytically, so it grows on trees, forms quite large plants. And in this case, this one's got growing fairly low down, but also has a number of seed capsules. So it's obviously pollinated by the pollinator, which is around. Often plants will grow from hollows in trees, often in the crotches of the trees. And the inflorescences carry about 30 to 40 flowers. Flowers are quite variable. And the specific epithet madidum comes from the Latin madidus, which means moist. And so some people think that the moist refers to the moist habitat, but this one doesn't necessarily grow in a very wet habitat, and it may refer to the moist looking center of the lip. Flowers are generally sort of this brownish yellow color. Occasionally you'll find some green forms, which are not very common. So you need quite a bit of room with this species for cultivation. It's a big growing plant. The type species for Dockwillia is Dockwillia linguiformis, the tongue orchid. It has these very distinct groove-shaped or grooved leaves and the wiry stem. It forms masses on the sides of trees and can also be found growing on rocks as well. So you can see the close-up here showing you the leaves, which have got the grooves on them. And often the leaves will grow right up against the substrate, maybe as a way of preserving moisture. I'm not really sure. So inflorescences produce about 20 flowers on the flower stem, non-resuppinate flowers that again don't last all that long. Thelychiton, tetragonum, another one of the Thelychiton species. And a number of years ago, Mark Clemens and David Jones established the genus Tetrabaculum for a group of species based around this complex because of the square stems. So the cross-section of these is square in cross-section, and the plants have these pendulous pseudobulbs with permanent leaves at the end, usually 2-3 leaves at the end. And inflorescences are produced from nodes towards the end of the stem, occasionally a little bit further back on some of the longer stems. The species is reasonably easy to grow here. It's grown epiphytically or on a mount, and it has quite a broad lip. And in fact, the lip is as broad across the apex as it is across the sides of the lip. A lot of times the flowers have got reddish markings on the margins, but usually sort of a yellowy, greeny coloured flower. A related species, Thelychiton melaleucophyllum, was so named because it grows on melaleuca trees, has a much broader lip midlobe and a slightly different scent. So one of the things that I think a number of taxonomists haven't really observed or taken into account is that scent can be used to distinguish a number of taxa. One of the more highly prized Sarcocalis in the region is Sarcocalis weinthallii, grows up in the mountains and in drier sort of scrub areas. And it's quite highly prized because of the markings on the flowers. So the spots are passed on to its hybrids. The lip has this quite distinct spot at the apex. And so this is probably a pollination syndrome thing. So the pollinator is probably attracted to that spot on the lip. And this is not very common in cultivation. It's quite a rare species. Another Sarcocalis, this one has quite slender leaves, Sarcocalis hilii, and it's a species that has 3 prominent calli on the lip. The middle callus is usually divided, so it looks like it's got 4 little knobs. And the apex of the lip is quite hairy and lovely crystalline texture to the flowers. Flower stems are fairly short and they produce flowers generally sequentially over a period of time. Flowers are about maybe 1/8 of an inch across. The second of our Cymbidium species, Cymbidium suavi, it's a species named because of the sweet perfume. And I usually pronounce this as suavi, usually pronounce the E on the end, because I know a number of people do just call this Cymbidium suave because we have a word that is used to refer to maybe sophistication or something like that. This is an unusual Cymbidium because it doesn't have any very distinct pseudobulbs. So the growths generally elongate and they keep just growing upwards. Often plants will grow in these cut logged trees. So this is a tree trunk which was produced when logging occurred in some of these areas. Flowers vary from green through to a sort of a yellow green, and inflorescences will carry up to about 40 flowers on the stem. The last of the Cymbidium species is Cymbidium canalicularum. It's a species that was named because the canal-shaped leaves, so you can see this distinct groove in the center of the leaf. And it's the most widespread of the Australian Cymbidiums. It's found along the east coast of Australia from around my region all the way up north, and also extends over into the Northern Territory and Western Australia, where it is subject to very dry conditions. This has a reputation for being a little bit difficult in cultivation, and the reason for that is that a lot of people tend to keep it too wet in the winter time. It's subject to very dry conditions in winter, and it relies on the moisture that's channeled down from the leaves at night in the cooler months to sustain it during the dry periods. It has a very large root system, which often goes into the trunks of dead trees. And so the root system is very significant in this particular species. The flowers are quite variable, usually a greeny yellow base color with lots of variations in the amount of this brown red marking on the flowers. It's quite showy when it's in bloom, carries up to about 50 flowers on the flower stem, and these flowers are about an inch tall. Some of the extremes in this particular species that are quite rare are the hyperchromic form, the green form with the white lip. The Sparksii form is a bit more common. There's a number of examples of that in cultivation, usually this more solid reddy purple color. And the red color lip is not very common in the Sparksii form, usually just red spots. I want to finish off with a little mention of the Orchid Conservation Alliance. I think a lot of people know a bit about this organization. And what I like about the organization is that you can get to travel to various parts of the world to see orchids growing in situ. And by seeing these orchids growing where they grow, you can get an idea of how to better treat them in cultivation. They're always on the lookout for membership, and they support quite a number of orchid reserves in the South American region. During the years of COVID, there were a number of trips planned, but these obviously had to be cancelled. So one of them was to Western Australia in springtime, and this is a good time to visit Western Australia, which, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the hotspots of the world. You can see quite a large range of terrestrial orchids, and I've heard on the grapevine that there may be a trip planned, or this trip might be planned for perhaps next year. So keep an eye out for that trip. So by going on these trips, not only can you experience the culture of the country, but also experience the food and see the orchids growing in situ. And you don't necessarily have to go very far off-road to see orchids. Here we've got this group photographing Phragmipedium bessiae just by the side of the road. Want to also just mention quickly my website, which has also been promoted. It's a very old website, so only recently it's been upgraded to try and make it a little bit more compatible with mobile phones and so on. At the end of my talks, I usually mentioned or confess that I'm not very computer literate, so I have to thank my partner, Roger Sawkins, for putting the PowerPoint together. If you have any questions, I'd be quite happy to try and answer those.
Gary, are there any orchids that grow on eucalyptus?
No. A lot of eucalyptus shed their bark, so it's not really an ideal place for those. So
Oh, I
yes,
thought it was also the strong flavor to them.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm not aware of any that grow on eucalyptus.
Thank you.
Gary, I have a question. Mitch Schneider here. I tend to agree with the Australians of splitting out some of the genera, especially the dendrobiums and the bulbophyllums from the mother genus. But I just had a quick question about the one of the telltale signs of genetic diversity or within different genera is the fertility of crosses. Do you know if the Australian genera, I haven't seen, like, for example, the dendrobiums, the splitting out speciosum and kingianum and other things, beyond bigonum, they don't really, I haven't seen too many good crosses or too many progeny beyond an F1 or even results of F1 for things of that nature. Do you know anything about the fertility of those genuses when crossed to their Eurasian cousins?
All right, so one of the things about, I guess, breeding behavior is that with the Australian groups, so with, for example, Thelichiton, all of the Thelichitons will produce progeny with each other. And so other genera like Docrelia, they generally will interbreed. So you get other Docrelia hybrids, but there's not much breeding done between Thelichiton and Docrelia because I don't think they're genetically closely enough related. So if they're not genetically closely enough related, they're not going to produce progeny. And that's one reason why I like the split system. The other thing you asked, you mentioned Dendrobium bigibbum, which is a North Queensland species. So it's what's also known as the Phalananthe species.
Yeah.
So those ones are, there have been hybrids done with Thelichiton and some of the other genera in the spatulata section of Dendrobium, which are found mostly in New Guinea. So there's been a little bit of hybridizing done. Some of the hybrids are not necessarily all that fertile. So some of the extended sort of hybridizing has been a little bit difficult. So that to me indicates that there's not a very close relationship with the group. Or with
And that holds true for the Australian genera of the bulbophyllum. Sorry, I'm terrible with names pronunciation. So
that's fine. Yeah,
that's been holding true then, that the Australian genera are genetically separate enough that they have trouble producing fertile offspring when bred to their Eurasian counterparts as a general trend, except for the Cymbidiums, which are widely used.
Yes. So with the bulbophyllums that you mentioned, the Australian ones, there's not been much hybridizing done with them. And so I'm not really aware of much in the way of genetic, I guess, crossing, breeding that's been done with amongst themselves, also between those and the Asian sort of group.
Well, thank you for talk. Excellent knowledge. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. You're welcome.
Gary, I have a question about the Cymbidiums you touched on.
Sure.
In Northern California, we grow them quite frequently too. They're easy to grow here. Yours seem to be, the ones in Australia seem to, I guess in the colder months, have a drier period, and that would be the opposite here. Our colder months are the wet period. Do you think they would be difficult to try to grow here?
No, I think providing you can control the watering. So in other words, during the rest period, if you are able to give them some cover, that shouldn't be a big issue.
Okay, yeah, some of them are really nice. No, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I didn't know as much about Australian orchids in general, so that was really nice.
That's good. So one thing I'm finding is I'm always learning something, so it's good if you learn something.
I agree, yes.
All right, maybe that's no other questions.
No. Thank you, Gary. That was great. People, everyone learned a lot, as you said. transitioning to Lynn, are you ready to do show and tell? There.
Hello,
Hi.
here comes my resident expert. Okay. Do I want to click for a slideshow or share screen? Or do you want
Put
to
the
sit down?
slide, let's try and put the slideshow up first.
Want to sit here?
Sure, I'll do it if you like.
Okay, Tom's gonna do this. Okay.
See if we can do this. Oh, just. Okay.
Looks good.
Okay. There you go. Are you seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Good, there you go.
Thanks, sweetie. Is he the best? Okay. What's that?
You can keep him.
I think I will. Thank you. So that was an interesting talk. Very, very different. Thank you for arranging that, Jeff, and whoever else found him. So we have about 50 lovely orchids tonight for the show and tell virtual table. Thank you for taking the time to send me your photos. So we'll get started. As always, the order in which they're shown is the order in which I received them. So no preferential treatment here. The first one is a gorgeous Cattleya hybrid from Gary Barg, or now it's officially, it was Laleo Cattleya, now it's officially Cattleya. Hauserman Sultan, Summer Spectacular. This is a complex hybrid, as you can see. It's about 50% Cattleya guttata, and the seed parent, Cattleya Ken color, dominates the shape here with the fuller petals and the wide frilly lip. Gary says this is his best blooming of it, with 16 flowers on one spike. This is beautiful. It's a stunning display. This is a hybrid registered in 1980 by Hauserman Orchids of Illinois. It has just 2 AOS awards, the most recent in HCC in 1984 with 16 flowers and one spike, which is the same as Gary's. The flowers are about 4 inches, and Gary says they're incredibly fragrant. Stuart Maneker shows us Lalea, or now it's Cattleya. Shelley, I'm not sure how you say this, Heinz. And the photo, what, say that?
When?
Okay. And the photo is as stunning. This is a great photo. The photo is as stunning as the flower itself. This is a primary hybrid of 2 small Brazilian Laleas, Elorii and Diana. Diana was actually once called Lalea bicalhoi. It was just registered in 2019, has not yet received any awards, but I think it needs a trip to the judging tables. This is really stunning. And the foliage is so clean on this plant. It's a really nice job, Stuart. This is a miniature Cattleya, and hybrids like this are excellent for windowsill growers as well as greenhouses. They're adaptable to a variety of temperatures from intermediate to cool, and they need filtered bright light. Stuart got this one from Peter T. Lynn, and also Gold Country Orchids. Alan Koch is another good source, or try Brookside in Menlo Park. They have a great website. This is Stuart's Banfieldara, Gilded Towers Mystic Maze, which has an HCC from AOS. Banfieldara is a complex man-made genus, as we can see, and it's a new one to me. Its components are all in the Oncididae alliance. ADGM is Adaglossum. Gilded Towers was registered in Hawaii in 2005 and awarded that year in Hawaii and subsequently in New Zealand. The flowers are about 4 inches wide, and that crisp contrast between the butter yellow and the chocolate brown, I think is really stunning. Stuart just bought this from Brookside at Orchids in the Park. So he said it's so pretty he wanted to share it even though he didn't actually bloom it himself. This is Stuart's Phalaenopsis alphinia. This is a hybrid of Phal violacea by Kingidium minus, which gives it the second parent gives this hybrid that swept back appearance, which is really unusual and cool. These flowers are very nice. There are at least 4 more buds coming along. This is another unawarded hybrid made by a French hybridizer, just registered in 2016. All Phalaenopsis are great windowsill growers, and as we can see, there's a lot of variety in shape and color and size to Phalaenopsis to choose from, so they're not all like those we see at Trader Joe's. This is Stuart's Phragmipedium Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is a highly prized primary hybrid with 79 awards. The graceful twisting of the long sepals that we see here, that comes from the Frag Sargentianum parent. He bought this at POE this year from Dave Sorkowski of Paradise. Stuart asked him to choose an easy frag for him, as he had never kept one alive before. Now it's grown a lot and is blooming while growing. He keeps it in a north-facing window. In San Francisco, this one has 2 new growths at the base too. He keeps it in a saucer with about ½ an inch of water, and he waters it lightly from the top when the tray is dry. This is a nice job, Stuart. Ooh, Tyler Albrecht shows us his Mexipedium seedling with a colorless alba flower. This looks to be a new and exciting color form that we haven't seen before. Tyler's reaching out for some expert opinions on this. On the left is the typical Mexipedium with just a flush of pink at the mouth of the pouch, on the staminode shield, and into the dorsal sepal. This charming little species can be difficult to grow successfully in cultivation. It's a species from Mexico, as the name would tell us, where it grows as a lithophyte, meaning it grows on rocks, actually on limestone outcrops, and the common name for it is the dry-growing Mexipedium. In its habitat, it receives moderate water in mid-spring and heavy water through the summer, then a 3-month dry period for midwinter until spring. This is stunning. This is Tyler's Paphiopedilum heleni variety alba, which he got from Paradise, and it's of the type that comes from piping rock orchids. This is a worm-growing species from North Vietnam and southern China, where it grows as a lithophyte on rocks in semi-deciduous forests on highly eroded limestone cliff faces facing north. All of these are little tips about how to grow it. It grows at elevations from 350 to 3,000 feet, and it's one of the smallest species in the genus. Like many of the paths, this one should do well on a windowsill in dappled or filtered light. Tyler's doing a great job getting 3 blooms on this little plant. This is Tyler's Habenaria medusa, which will make you just want to go out and buy one, right? The flowers are so fabulous. The name medusa refers to the snake-like offshoots, which are actually, those are the elongated side lobes of the tiny lip. And don't you just wonder what pollinator it is trying to attract with those sexy fringes waving in the breeze. The species is found on Borneo and Sulawesi at low elevations, so this is a warm grower. Tyler says this unlabeled terrestrial orchid was sent with him along with that medusa when he purchased it. Any help with the ID, please use chat or email Tyler directly. His email address is on the top by his name. This is Tom Pickford's Miltonia spectabilis, possibly horticultural form Morelliana. He has about 50 big 3 inch by 4 inch flowers on a plant that completely engulfs a tiny wood basket. Spectabilis is an appropriate name, and this calls for the applause meter, I think. I love this plant. This is a species found on the east coast of Brazil as a cool to warm grower, and Tom grows it in a greenhouse with temperatures into the low 40s. It's normal for the foliage and the pseudobulbs to have a slightly yellow-green color. That's actually a sign that the light is just perfect, bright, like it's very bright. There are over 20 AOS awards on this species. None of them have this deep, deep coloring. This is Tom's Cattleya tigrina, form alba. This was formerly known as Cattleya leopoldii, and the typical color form is on the left. You'll recall that alba color forms in orchids does not mean that they have no color. It means they have no red pigment or anthocyanin. So this is a true alba form. Tigrina is a large, robust species from Brazil. The plant can be over 3 feet tall, so not a great windowsill candidate, but it forms a beautiful head of a dozen or more 4-inch flowers. And the spotting we see in the left-hand photo is also typical of tigrina. This is a bifoliate Cattleya, meaning that each pseudobulb has a pair of leaves, and the bifoliates are notably fussy about being disturbed. So repotting should only be done when new root growth is starting. If it's disturbed at the wrong time, many bifoliates will sulk and they'll decline over a year or two until they finally expire, and I can vouch for this. This is Tom's Cattleya bicolor. According to the Baker notes, there are actually 3 different morphological groups of bicolor, which are now recognized as subspecies bicolor, subspecies minascarensis, and subspecies brasiliensis. And each subspecies originates in widely divergent habitats from the coast to over 6,000 feet. So if you're growing bicolor, you want to do a little research to determine the best conditions for your plant to get a maximum flower count and size. The flowers are about 3.5 inches and deliciously fragrant. This is Tom's Cattleya forbesii. It has 5 striking flowers on 2 inflorescences. Forbesii is another Brazilian species. It was once common epiphyte in the coastal swamps and riverside forests of Brazil, but clearing land for agriculture has severely depleted this population, and now it's only found in small numbers in widely scattered locations. So it's good that they're well preserved in many of our collections. It actually grows in relatively dim light in dark forests, and the recommended light level in cultivation is only 1,800 to 2,500 foot candles, so a lot less than the normal Cattleya light. The clone Equilab has several awards, and it has one of the most dramatically colored lips. Judy Carty shows us Bulbophyllum treschii, which is a small, cool-growing epiphyte found in Malaysia at altitudes of 3,300 to about 5,000 feet. So it probably grows best on the cool side of intermediate, and it prefers lower light. Each umbel that we see here generally has 4 flowers. They're all open at once. The flowers are over 6 feet long. At the top of each flower, that little chartreuse and burgundy hood is the dorsal sepal. The lateral sepals are fused together to form those long enchanting tails. These 2 plants are lucky to have escaped an attack by Judy's 2 kittens. They look pretty tempting to me. This is definitely bulbo season in Judy's greenhouse. This is Bulbophyllum tingaborinum, now known as Bulbo pectanveneris, excuse me. This is a species found in southern China, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. Grows below 3,300 feet, so this is an intermediate grower. It prefers medium shade, and it wants to be moist, not wet, year-round. And like most bulbos, it can be a great windowsill plant until it gets to be as big as Judy's is. It can be grown mounted like this, or in a pot or basket with moss or fine bark. The dorsal sepal on this bulbo is not hooded, and like the previous species, it's not hooded, excuse me, like the previous species, so it reveals a tiny petal and lip structure within. The long lateral sepals are fused only partway down on this one, and they give a beautiful fringed effect. This is Judy's Bulbophyllum plumatum, species which you would expect to be plum colored, and that is the usual form, but this is also, there's also a golden form or a flava form. These seropetalum type bulbos are best grown mounted to display the graceful pendulous inflorescences, but they can also be grown in baskets using moss or a fine bark. This is a species from the Philippines and Sumatra, found in swampy forests, so humidity is very important for this plant. Judy bought this bulbophyllum as Jacobsonii in 2002 from Petite Plaisance, whom some of you will remember. Jacobsonii has since been lumped into Bulboplumatum. So this is the typical color form of the bulbo that we saw in the previous slide. All in all, a great bulbo showing, Judy. Dale Martin shows us Vandicostylus Plonpit Blue, which is a complex hybrid of Vandas and Rhincostylus, I guess, to produce this eye-popping purple. And it's growing well to produce 2 spikes at once. Needs very high light, warm temperatures. That's the secret to success. This is beautiful. This is Dale's Rhinanthera fire coral. It's a primary hybrid of 2 Rhinanthera species, Philippinensis by Isosepala, both low elevations epiphytes. There are 20 species of Rhinanthera from Southeast Asia to the Philippines, and they're best grown in wood slat baskets, and they like partial to full sun, like Vandas, but unlike Vanda, less water and fertilizer after they finish blooming. Otherwise, their growth habit is very much like Vanda. They need a lot of light to bloom this well. Look, iridescent. This is Dale's Brachiolalia Petite Stars. It's a charming little hybrid made by H&R, Roy Tokunaga, who many of us know, in 1998. It may still be available in the marketplace, or try Dale's website if you're looking for one. Austin Creek Orchids is his website. This is an ideal windowsill candidate because of its small stature. It has perky, forward-facing starry flowers with purple polka dots. Be mindful that mature plants must dry out between waterings, so it's best grown in a pot with a porous, free-draining medium. Fertilize weekly meaning 1/4 to half the normal dose. This is a very rewarding orchid for any collection. This is Dale's Paphiopedilum godefroyii, named for Mrs. Godefroy, a late 19th century French orchid enthusiast. This big fat flower always makes me smile. It's just so cool, and it's so oversized for the plant, which is beautiful even when it's not in bloom. The plant has dark green leaves, mottled pale green on the top leaf surface, and reddish underneath. Really a beautiful little plant. This is a terrestrial or lithophytic species found in Thailand, on limestone cliffs, in leaf litter or moss, or on tree roots at elevations less than 50 feet above sea level. So what does that tell us? It's a hot grower. It can bloom off and on for months. This is another windowsill candidate, like many paphs are. Needs bright indirect light, warm household temperatures. Our president, Jeff Harris, bought this as, quote, Stellus species. And he's been trying to figure out what it is. And little wonder, there are over 500 species of Stellus found in the New World, meaning the Western Hemisphere. And most of them have delicate little flowers like these. Jeff posted it on Orchid Forum, and Marnie Turkel responded that it appears to be the photo that she sent on the right side. I'm not sure I can say this right. Itatii, named for an area in Brazil, although close-ups of Itatii seem to be fuzzier than Jeff's, and the lip is different. So it's close, but if anyone has any other thoughts, please respond on chat or directly to Jeff. Jeff's Pleurophallis alvaroi, which is named for a Colombian orchid grower named Alvaro. It's found in the central Cordillera of Colombia near Medellin as a small-sized, cool to cold growing epiphyte at elevations around 6,500 feet. Pleurophallis is the largest orchid genus in the world, I should say in the New World, with more than 1,000 species throughout subtropic and tropical Americas. The flower on this little species is about 3/8 of an inch. Jeff got this from Equa Henriette at Orchids in the Park in 2018, and he keeps it in the fog house under his deck in San Francisco, where it blooms twice every year, in January, February, and again in August, September. Very cute little row of flowers, the way they're arranged. This is Jeff's Dendrochilum filiforme. This robust grower is native to the Philippines. It's found at low elevation, so this is an intermediate grower, as are most dendrochilums, and Jeff grows it in his greenhouse. The plant's only about 8 to 10 inches tall, but Jeff says that every August it puts out a 2-foot long wiry inflorescences, several 2-foot long wiry inflorescences, which if you stare hard at the photo on the right, you can see has bright chartreuse flowers arranged in 2 neat little rows along the stem. The flowers are fragrant. They last for weeks to months. And Jeff got this from J&L Orchids at Orchids in the Park in 2013. So he's had this for 10 years almost. Dave Hermeyer shows us 2 color forms of Laelia crispa. This first one is the vinicolor form, referring to vinny, wine-colored lip. It's a nice rich Merlot or Bordeaux, I think. This is a species native to Brazil, where it's usually found growing on the upper branches of very tall trees at 2,500 to 3,700 feet of elevation. So it's seeking very bright light and strong air movement up there in the treetops. The Baker notes recommend up to 4,000 foot candles. That's very bright, and it's a warm grower. The flowers are about 5 inches. They're fragrant, showy, and also long lasting. And Dave's Laelia crispa carnea. Carnea generally refers to blood red coloring, but this one shows just the lightest flush of rose inside the lip. Maybe it suffers from some form of anemia. The crispa starry shape and very frilly lip, I think, is really charming. Dave grows them so well mounted, both of his plants look to have been on their mounts for many years. They can also be grown in pots filled with a very coarse, open, fast draining medium because the roots must dry between waterings or the roots will rot. So that's a strong recommendation for mounting them. Also because Laelia crispa are very slow to reestablish after being disturbed. So they should be repotted or divided only when really necessary, and then only when the roots are just starting to grow and you see those new root tips. Susan Anderson shows us Cattleya tigrina, formerly known as Cattleya leopoldii. It's found in coastal forests below 400 feet within southern Brazil. As a large bifoliate to trifoliate, warm growing epiphyte with leathery leaves, which have serrated edges. There are up to 10 fragrant flowers borne on each tall inflorescence. The plant, including the flower, racemes, is often 3 to 4 feet tall. So this is not for the typical windowsill, but the flowers are about 4 inches across. They're very fragrant. And the contrast of the bronze sepals and the petals that are spotted mahogany with that fuchsia lip, I think that makes for a real showstopper. The fact that this is a bifoliate Cattleya tells us to be uber careful about repotting it. It can sulk for several years before giving up the ghost. And I know that because I just lost mine. Speaking of showstoppers, Susan Stanhope tigrina clone predator is just that. It's a showstopper. And the vanilla fragrance fills the room, fills our greenhouse. This is a Mexican epiphyte. It's a large plant, best grown in a basket, as Susan grows it, because you need to accommodate the pendant inflorescences which arise at the base of the pseudobulbs, and they grow straight down. It likes to be kept moist much of the year, especially when in active growth. And the sphagnum moss that you see hanging behind it is to ensure that the plant receives sufficient humidity. The flowers are 5 to 6 inches across. They last about a week, and they're so complex, I can't begin to figure out the flower parts on them. The clone predator was awarded an FCC by the AOS in 1996 in Southern California. This is spectacular. Susan Stanhope ruckeri is named for a 19th century German orchidist. There's 67 species of Stanhope, and this is one of the loveliest in my view. This is found in wet montane forests as a fragrant, medium-sized, warm-growing epiphyte. Susan's photo shows off well the complex structures of the plant because we can see a flower from almost every angle. Stanhopes prefer strong but filtered light, and they're reluctant bloomers if not given sufficient light, and also they need good air movement to flower. Stanhopes are pollinated by male euglossine bees, which you see on the left. They visit the flowers to collect fragrance compounds, which they store in their hind legs, that lower photo on the left, and then they use that fragrance compound later in courtship displays. It's interesting. Roberta Fox shows us Neoconioia monophylla. Neoconioia is a genus of 2 smallish epiphytic species, both with orange flowers. Roberta says that this miniature plant has been a taxonomic puzzle. For years, it was considered a member of the Cattleya tribe, Leyleii. The flowers certainly look like a slightly wonky mini Cattleya. However, DNA analysis shows it's actually closely related to the Pleurophthalidinae. The leaves are fairly stiff, as you'd expect of Cattleya relatives, but it doesn't seem to have any pseudobulbs. That's more like a pleurophthalid. The genus has only 2 species, so clearly this is a taxonomic outlier. It's native to the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, so it grows cool to intermediate, and Roberta grows it outside at her house in Costa Mesa. This is Roberta's Habenaria ericmichaelii. Synonym is rhodochyla. Cardinal's roost is the clone. Q considers these synonyms. Eric Christensen argued that they're separate species. J. Fowl says, and I quote, ericmichaelii is confused with Habenaria rhodochyla, but differs in the 90-degree angle of the rostellum of the flower, short-statured plants, and the leaves with silver white square spots. So we'll let that battle rage on without us. This is native to Assam, China, in a wide area of Southeast Asia. It grows warm to intermediate, goes dormant in the winter. Roberta doesn't let it go completely dry for long periods. She waters it lightly, then in spring, around April, she increases the watering to start its growth cycle. This is Roberta's Dendrobium hecoense. There are 2 cultivars here to show the color variation. This is a charming little miniature with long-lasting 1-inch flowers, and it can bloom twice a year or more. This is native to Yunnan, China, at elevations of 3,500 to 7,000 feet, so it can grow cool or cool intermediate. It's often found growing on the underside of branches, so the little cup flowers don't fill up with water. Although it is deciduous, Roberta doesn't dry it out, but since hers are mounted, they do dry off rapidly, and so that doesn't seem to be an issue. Roberta grows this outdoors at her house in Costa Mesa. Roberta's Sobralia violacea. This species is native to a wide range of northern South America. It also grows over a range of elevations from 100 to 3,300 meters, or over 10,000 feet. So it's not fussy about temperature. Roberta grows it on her patio. The flowers only last for a day or so, but they're produced successively every few days. So the plant is in bloom for about 6 weeks to almost 2 months. They're fragrant and the flowers are about 4 inches. Kay Klum shows us Bulbophyllum lobii, which grows in her intermediate greenhouse. It's a species widespread throughout Southeast Asia, where it is found at elevations up to 7,500 feet, so it adapts to a wide range of temperatures. One large fragrant flower arises from the base of each new pseudobulb. Bulbophyllum lobii is available in the marketplace, and it's a rewarding, fairly easy grower, suitable for windowsills and greenhouses alike. The flowers are 2.5 to 3 inches, and they're nicely displayed on the inflorescence. This is Kay's Arangus mysticidii. Arangus is a South African genus, which generally likes shady, warm, humid conditions. Mysticidii is a miniature epiphytic species found in gorges and along streams on small twigs overhanging the water. So humidity is key. It's best cork mounted with cool to hot temperatures, moderate shade, high humidity in the growing season, and a cooler dry rest. The flowers are about 1¼ inches and they are night fragrant with a fragrance of lily of the valley. So they're pollinated by probably a night moth. This is really a beautifully grown plant, very pretty. This is Kay's Miltonia famatochila, which she grows intermediate. There are about 20 species in the South American genus Miltonia, and they grow well in pots or they can be mounted as Kay has hers here. They're part of the Oncidium alliance and are often used in hybridizing. Fomatokyla is from Brazil. It's a medium-sized, warm to cool growing epiphyte, and the flowers are spicily fragrant. This is Chazodontoglossum hostolabium, which she also grows intermediate. This charming little climbing or creeping species is found in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. The plant's only about 10 inches tall, but the inflorescence can be up to 4 feet, as we see here. Water should be reduced in winter, but they should not be allowed to dry out completely. The flowers are about 2.5 inches with really beautiful striking stripes and spots and very showy lip. Love that flower. Vincent Petromartyr shows us Oncidium kegeliana, found in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru at around 8,200 feet in wet upper montane forests and fairly bright places near the edge of the forest or a clearing. It's a medium-sized, cool to cold growing epiphyte. Temperatures into the 40s are ideal. Vincent bought this from Equihenra about 3 years ago, and he grows it outside in dappled sun or shade. The flowers are about 2.5 inches, and they have a lovely, almost glossy texture. Vincent says this is either a very late or quite early blooming Cymbidium, which he grows outside in his backyard. There's no plant tag, but it reliably gives him 2 spikes every year. It's always fun to know that Cymbidium season is just around the corner. Vincent's Masdevallia rolfianum, and he thanks John Leathers for helping him to identify it. He purchased this from Equihenra 3 years ago, but lost the tag. He grows it outdoors, and it obviously is thriving. Rolf was a Kew taxonomist in the 1800s. What would you think of taxonomy today with all of the lumping and splitting of genera? This is a species native to Costa Rica in windy cloud forests, so our Bay Area outdoor climate is ideal, except for our current heat wave. This can bloom in the fall, winter, and spring, so it's a robust Masdevallia, and the inflorescences are shorter than the leaves, so Vincent has it nicely displayed in a pot where the yellow caudae or tails can hang over the edge. This is Vincent's Oncidium with no tag, but he says he bought it at Trader Joe's 2 years ago, and it's beautifully daytime fragrant. So I think it's safe to bet that it is Oncidium Sherry Baby, a great addition to any collection, and also a good windowsill grower. Vincent has 3 spikes on it. It's nicely grown, but he's not convinced that this has the Sherry Baby vanilla chocolate fragrance. So if anyone has any other ideas, please use chat to let Vincent know. Jan and Fred Anderson show us BLC Color Magic. This is a complex hybrid registered by Fred Stewart of San Gabriel, California in 1977. This is not one of his more famous hybrids, but you will know Fred Stewart for Catleanthe Chocolate Drop, Catleanthe Trick or Treat, Catletonia Why Not, Cymbidium, Lillian Stewart, and many others, which we've seen here on Show and Tell. But I digress. BLC Color Magic is a frilly beauty, and it's about 2/3 Cattleya dowiana, which gives it that fabulous lip. I always check the AOS awards so I can see how large the flowers are. This one's about 6 inches. It's just a beautiful summertime treat. Jan and Fred's Hariella retrocala, which the taxonomists have now moved to Gastrochylis. This little gem is found in Taiwan in broad-leaved forests from 1,600 to 5,000 feet. It needs moderate shade, plenty of water while the root tips are alive, and less so when they go dormant. The plants will do best if mounted, as we see them, as we see Jan's here, or in a wood slat basket and given high humidity and good air circulation. The flowers are about 1 inch. They're probably enjoying the heat in the Anderson's Novato greenhouses even less than we are. This is Jan and Fred's BLC Empress Worsley, another pretty complex hybrid. This one registered by Voodoo Orchids in 1974. His parentage has more than 10 cattleyas, and the result is this lovely rose-colored flower with an outstanding lip. The clone Roman Holiday was awarded in HCC in 1981. So this is an old clone. Javier Perez Sanchez shows us Dendrobium speciosum, variety Carnarvonense. Well, so it's early for speciosums in this hemisphere. The weather has all of us, I think, kerfluffled, including this plant. This is the Australian native that Gary showed us with the long arching clusters of flowers. I had a little photo of Speciosum in situ on the right as an example. It's a perfect outdoor grower in the Bay Area, protected from winter rains as they need a dry winter rest. One of the great things about dendrobiums is that they can produce more than one inflorescence from the apex of a single cane, and the old canes can bloom again for several years. Speciosum is found in New South Wales and Victoria, Australia as a lithophyte from the coastline to about 150 miles inland on rocks at the base of cliffs in open forests with good air movement, and they're stunning additions to any collection. Javier's Cattleya mossii variety Salmialba. Salmialba indicates that the only anthocyanin or red pigment is in the lip. This is a Venezuelan native found in the intermediate to cooler parts of the coastal mountains. The very fragrant flowers can be 6 to 8 inches, one of the largest in the genus. It's used extensively in hybridizing to introduce larger flowers to the other parent. This is a big plant up to about 14 inches, but very, very rewarding if you have space for it. Dave Hermeyer provided the only entry for our orchid pet parade this month. This is his Miltonia Trader Joensis in a very cute owl pot. So there you have it, and we'll see you next month.
All right. Remember how we did the pin line video? I had to go to video
To do what?
to show and tell. I mean,
Basically just share your,
share my video.
right, and then we just pin you here. And we can see it here too. Because if people online want to see it, they just pin you. Just make sure your audio is off. Getting there. Kind of.
All right. So tonight, let's see. Got a little show and tell table. Thank you, Florence. Florence brings in Bolda, Sundust, Foreign. It's told by.
And hear you, Jeff.
He didn't talk. Where you can see it on the screen.
Yeah. Just watch it on the screen. He's holding up the tags because he's a ways away from the microphone.
This is the one that I had on the show and tell. This is an area. It's a salmon to watermelon color. The packy. It's funny, we're doing virtual with the one.
Well, the nice part is we get to see it in big. That's big.
Dendrobium Victoria Regina. Dendrobium Tabiki by Brachyusin. Really answers questions, so species. Tom Bears brought in the assortment of paths. Charles Worthy Eye. Henry Adams. That's it for show and tell. There you
We got
go.
2 awards, both were there.
Thanks, Chapter. All right, so I think now we need to do the poll, right? To know who wants to get the gift certificates. And then we'll do the raffle in the room with items on the raffle table. Australian Dendrobiums and Atlantics.
You get it.
Yeah, how do I spell it? I have to launch my order.
Yeah, it says you have. We'll launch the poll in just 1 second. Let us know using that if you wish to be entered into the drawing.
Poll should be on folks online. Do you see the poll?
Does anyone see the poll?
I don't see anyone.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. We'll end recording, but we'll stay online here as people fill in the poll. And we hope to see you next week for the board meeting. We hope to see you again in a month for the general meeting. And please let us know if you have a theme suggestion for POE. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.